And now, Bogarde on film. Dirk Bogarde reads an extract from his autobiographies about his film career. Episode 1, Breaking In.
The war was over, I'd just been demobbed, I was broke and I needed a job to carry me on until January, when I'd arranged to start work as a prep school teacher. The audition for the Actors' Reunion Theatre was held in the Duke of York's Theatre on the set of Is Your Honeymoon Really Necessary? Although it was barely 10:30 in the morning, the theatre was full from pit to gallery. Here they all were, the out-of-work ex-actors looking for a break, and here I was among them. The last of my money jangled sadly in my pocket. Realising that it might go on for some time, how could you audition an audience of nearly 500 people for a one-act play for children? I took a seat on the centre aisle towards the back so that I'd be able to leave for my train without disturbing whatever was going on at the time. Someone got up and explained that the director, Alan Davis, ex-The Buffs, would now come among us to cast his play, and with a spirited leap into the orchestra stalls, he hurried up the aisle, cast list in hand, looking for his actors. I remember that he was very spick and span and crack regiment-looking. Up and down the stalls he hurried, peering along every row, pencil in hand. "I'm looking for my Jesus now," he cried. "A young Jesus. No beards, smooth-faced Jesus. Anyone feel like a Jesus?" He'd reached my area by this time and tripped over my feet, sticking out into the aisle. When I withdrew them hastily, apologising, he grabbed my arm. "Got him! I've got my Jesus. Trot down there and give them your name." We rehearsed in the dress circle bar for a week or so, and very seriously indeed, and opened one morning at the deathly hour of 11, in modern clothes before a sparse audience of agents, managers, assistants, casting directors, and what were called in those days talent scouts. To my intense surprise, I was a great success as Jesus. After the play was over, I found myself jammed into a corner of the stage box, surrounded by excited, complimentary, quacking people, handing me telephone numbers and begging that I call them, all, it appeared, immediately. The exercise had not reawakened my almost completely dormant desire for the theatre, which I'd allowed to slip away in the cornfields of Normandy. All I wanted was an immediate job to help me out until term time. Anthony Ford, who'd been my agent before the war, tried to give advice. Well, it seems stupid not to go and see someone if they're all so keen about your work. Wasn't there anyone you could deal with? Well, a lot of them sounded mad. There was one fellow there, very cool and collected. He just faded away. "Oh, he sounds your best bet, then. What's his name?" I fished about in the pocket of my flannels. Frederick Joachim, an address in Regent Street. Frederick Joachim's office, 3 floors up in a shabby building over a coffee shop at the top end of Regent Street, was the exact size of his desk. That is to say, it was about 6 feet by 4, and contained himself crouching in a small chair, his pleasant secretary who crouched beside him, and a chair for the client. I asked him what he'd do if there was ever a fire in the coffee shop below, and he said very sharply that he was an optimist. At first he sent me off on a round of all the studios to meet the casting people. Everyone was polite and kind, but each asked the same question: "What have you done already?" And when one said nothing since 1940, except be in the army, they all looked sadly wise. "I think," said Freddie, sipping a cup of filthy coffee in the coffee shop below his office, "this thing called television could be useful. Since they're just starting up, they won't be too choosy. I think they'd take anyone, even you." We started on television, and he was proved right. I got my first job. "But what are you going to call yourself?" said Ford, picking his way through a vegetarian salad in the restaurant at Peter Jones. "Van den Bogarde sounds terribly foreign to me." But why don't I drop the van and the den and the diphthong? Ford looked doubtful. Well, my grandfather's name was Forrest Niven. What about that? He was an actor too. There's a Niven already. It leads to confusion. I pushed my half-eaten salad to one side. I'm going to be called Dirk Bogarde, and that's it. That's my new name. No one else is called that, for God's sake. Ford finished the last of his shredded carrot. There's always Humphrey, of course, he said mildly. I told Freddie that afternoon, and he pursed his lips. Too harsh. You want a nice, easy name that people will remember instantly. What about Paul, or Robert, or James? You tell them that I'm that, and not to spell it D-I-C-K. A few weeks later, at Victoria, on my way home, I bought the evening papers, and there it was for the first time, splendidly new, correctly spelled, under the modest television heading. David Markham and Dirk Bogarde in Rope, a thriller. Freddie soon had me whizzing round London like a cotton shuttle. I went to all the casting directors and studios. At the Rank Organisation, a flourishing empire founded on flour milling, in a palatial house in South Street, I was interviewed for half an hour by one of the chief executives. Helpless, I was asked to stand on a pale blue dais before him. It had obviously once supported a sumptuous bed, and told to remove my coat, my jacket, waistcoat, and finally my tie. Bewildered but complying, I was asked to turn around slowly, like beef on a hook. Your head's too small, kid, said Earl St. John from behind his cigar. He threw a scatter of glossy photographs across the partner's desk. We're looking for people like that. He proudly indicated Stuart Granger, James Mason, Dennis Price. It's nice of you to come, Bert, but your head's too small for the camera, you're too thin, and the neck is not right. I don't know what it is exactly about the neck. He squinted through money-box eyes. But it is not right. Crestfallen, with a neck complex, not to mention a too small head, I went back to Freddie's office for comfort and a coffee. I think it's time I packed it all in. It's so bloody humiliating. And then a play I got a part in became fashionable. It was packed nightly and everyone came to see us. Film companies, agents, talent scouts, and Ian Dalrymple, quiet, soft-spoken, thoughtful, articulate, who looked more like a Cambridge Don than a film producer. He signed me up for his next film, Esther Waters. He was so gentle, so persuasive, so unlike the kind of film producer I'd ever expected to meet that I was lost. But, tell me, what about my neck? He pushed his glasses up his nose and looked hard at me. What's the matter with your neck? Well, the rank people say it's too thin. My head's too small. I don't look like James Mason. Well, I don't see anything wrong with your neck. But as for your head, that'll soon swell. With £30 a week from the Rank Organisation as a sort of holding salary until the film started, and 10 a week from the play, I was richer than I ever imagined I'd be. And one day I walked with great courage and my OXO tin into an estate agent in Sloane Square and rented number 44, Chester Row, for 10 guineas a week. In the kitchen in the basement was a quart of ale and a smoked haddock and mashed potatoes, and under the unbelieving but pleased eyes of Freddie Erkim, I signed my contract with the Rank Organisation for 7 years. At the end of June, my salary began. I was to receive the unheard-of sum of £3,000 a year with yearly options on their side to renew. I decided to have a housewarming party. Freddie came, Forward came, my parents came up from Sussex, and a bright-eyed, slender little woman came who looked rather like a blackbird with a hat and a veil. Her name was Olive Dodds, the contract artist representative at Rank. This was the woman who was to push me or steer me, whichever needed doing, through the paradise hell of the cinema jungle. She raised her glass of Madeira and lifted her veil and looked round the room with its family portraits from junk shops and bowls of flowers and worn Persian rugs, and drank to my success. Not what I imagined. Not a film star's house. Well, what did you expect? Oh, I don't know, off-white, chromium, stripped pine, a Utrillo reproduction, Peter Jonesy. Well, it isn't, and I'm not a film star. Yet, she said. I'm rather afraid that very soon you might be. She cocked her blackbird head, smiling gently. I wonder if you'll like it. Well, it won't be for ages. You've got your name above the title on your first film. Technically, you exist as a star, my dear. Very good luck. Giddily like a run-amok balloon, I swirled happily into the void. The people I now had to mix with were all established. They were all film stars. I knew almost nothing of what they discussed. I desperately sought to establish myself in their eyes, but I had no possible way of doing this except to chatter away about my war. And no one wanted to hear my bragging. I bored them witless. In desperation and in fear, I started to drink too much, hoping that this would give me courage, when all it gave me was a blinding hangover every morning. In the studios, I developed a cold arrogance to protect myself. The worst and most sickening part of each day at Pinewood was the lunch hour. I knew no one well enough to eat with. I had no set table. Like a new boy at school, I sat miserably in my dressing room reading the script and not eating, or forced myself to go to the bar, which meant running the gauntlet of the great restaurant. But in order to make this voyage, I had to go blind and deaf and walk like a robot, swiftly through the chattering, crowded tables, looking neither right nor left. One day I was summoned by telephone to present myself at Earl St. John's office at 12:30. He was genial, quiet, polite. Olive Dodds was also present, silent. He handed me a note wordlessly. It was a mild complaint, suggesting that perhaps Mr. Bogarde might be asked not to walk through the restaurant each day as if he owned it. It was signed David Lean. My mouth was dry, my hand shook. I apologized to Earl St. John and Mrs. Dodds and stayed alone in my room from then on. One evening, Ford came to dinner with his wife, Glynis Johns. I bought 2 bottles of hock, and we lit candles. But their visit was, as it happened, not entirely social. They came to instruct, to correct, to help. I sat frozen with shock at their gentle, considered, constructive advice. I was behaving badly. They both knew why and sympathized, but I had to pull myself together pretty soon, or disaster lay ahead. You talk too much. You exaggerate constantly. You're boring, rude, and self-opinionated, said Glynis. And people don't like that kind of behaviour in this profession. A little humility wouldn't be a bad thing. You're supposed to be a professional. Try and behave like one. Shattered by the truth, I heaved an empty hock bottle through the enormous aquarium full of tropical fish which stood at the end of the room. Cascades of water and weed, rocks and fish shot across the floor, mixed with my uncontrollable wine and anger tears. They left shortly afterwards, picking their way through the wreckage of the fish tank and the shards of my ego.